Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, robot, and loin streamer, and today I'm going to tell you why you've probably been reading The Pawn and the Puppet incorrectly, and you probably hated it. Yeah, but before we get started, before I spoil that for you, number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. There is Lamai, which is the monthly prompt contest here on the channel where I give you a prompt. You guys write a story for it, and then the first Monday of the month, I will read the story. The prompt is always listed in the link. And then the second thing is the Fresh Meat feature, where if you have an indie book out there, submit your first chapter. It will be read here on the channel, and hopefully that'll help it find new readers and new life through the YouTube algorithms. And then number three, if you would like to check out any of my books, they are available at all of your favorite retailers. I currently have 3 out, and there is a 4th one coming out in October, so check those out. Get ready to laugh or cry or be in pain. It just depends on what you like. Yeah. So with all that said, let's jump into this. And what I usually do on the channel is walk through the synopsis, a synopsis of the story, sometimes more detailed than others. It not only gives you an idea of what the story is actually about, but it gives some context to some of the critiques that I give at the end of the book or comments that I give at the end of the book. And also it helps show the flow of the story, because if I'm going to tell you before we get into the synopsis, so you can keep this in your mind as we go through it, I think it'll make a lot more sense. So this is not serious literature, if that's not obvious. It's not trying to be serious literature. It's not trying to really get into what mental illness is. This is a savior fantasy. It is ultimately a caregiver, Skylena, courting the most dangerous character in the book that everybody is scared of. But she is the one that he falls for. She is the one that controls him because he wants her so desperately. So once you look at this as the ultimate savior romance complex sort of thing, where it's just wish fulfillment of the main character being the dream girl, living out her fantasy, and the author just having fun writing out her peripheral kind of fantasy, savior fantasy, it puts a lot of it into perspective, at least in my opinion. You'll have to let me know once you get through the video or if you've read this book, if that puts it into some level of perspective. So with that said, let's jump into the synopsis. It starts out with Skylena drawing a picture of a marionette as she waits to go to her job interview at the local asylum. She's going to the job interview not because she wants to actually work at the asylum, but because the job is for her sister's position, and her sister is dead, so the position is open. Now, before her sister died, the two of them made a promise to stay close as possible forever. And since the sister is dead and there's nothing really left of her, the only way that Skylena can think to stay close to her sister is to take on this job in this horrible place in the city that is terrible. Enter into some exposition about the perfection city life requires, because Skylena lives out in the bush, but her new job will make her live near the city and abide by city rules. Some of those expectations include women looking like dolls and being so skinny that your skin's wrapped around your bones and you might faint. Other dollification routines include nightly soaking for softer, shinier skin and changing dresses multiple times a day to match the time of day. Skylena arrives at the asylum for her interview. People are weird. Flashbacks to when Sky was reunited with her sister, Scarlet, at the age of 15. It turns out her mother was prostituting her sister. At 19, the two girls promised to never leave each other. As I just said, the next day Scarlet was dead and their house was on fire. During the interview, we learned that Skylena got the opportunity for this position through a friend of hers named Ulrich, and that man is also the person who found her after her house burned down and is also a friend of Scarlet, as we learn later. Ulrich is kind of super rich and has political connections, so he put in a good word for Skylena, and she got in. Now, they're already telling rumors about Skylena, saying that she lit her own house on fire, she possibly killed her own sister, but obviously Skylena's like, I didn't do that. Regardless of the rumors, she gets the job and is shown around the facility. She's also exposed to a couple of treatments, which are cruel in practice and to which the nurses laugh about their ineffectiveness and how the patients can't be helped. Skylena's surprised by the treatments, despite how her sister used to work here and had told her about the job, but apparently not about this specifically. Somehow no one made her sign an NDA before showing her these private practices, though they do want to keep them a secret. That seemed like a little bit of an oversight. After meeting a couple of patients, Skylena is introduced to the one that she is not allowed to actually talk to. Well, she's shown the room, and that is the illustrious, probably big-dicked patient 13. He's so dangerous and terrible that we don't talk about that, or else you're going to get punished. You got that? And it's punishment in not a sexy way. After getting the job, Skye heads back to Ulrich's house, where he speaks of learning the city's customs. Ulrich has a feast with Skye and basically tells her to say goodbye to her old life because things are about to get different because of her new job. Following that, enter into a forced transformation scene where Skye is made into a dollish girl with jewelry and fine clothing in an opulent bath. Then she looks over everything and thinks about how she should be happy and how she should love all of this finery, but it isn't exactly what she wants. Then, a flashback to Skye taking her sister out of the closet after she'd been abused and hid to hurt herself. Long night over, Skye goes to work on her first day. She wants to eat, but can't. Everyone's sharing the rumor that she killed her sister. Head nurse is like, better get used to it. Rumors will only get worse. Skye wanders around the hospital, is disgusted, and goes to do her duties, then sees a nurse coming out of patient 13's room while crying softly to herself. Let's be real. Those are probably post-nut tears. The D was just too good. Skye works with one of the patients named Chekis. Previously, she saw him getting waterboarded as a treatment. By working with him, and I mean by just straight up talking to him, because they have all of the treatments in the world in this place except for talk therapy. But through talk therapy, she gets Chekis to open up. He admits that he killed his family, his daughter and wife, because they were driving themselves crazy following the dollification rules, and he didn't want to see them suffer. Apparently, moving out of the city was not an option, because obviously through Skylena, if you live not in the cities, you don't have to follow those rules. Now as Chek is talking to her, though, Skylena, of course, asks him about patient 13 because she just can't help herself. Skylena is then called to the hospital office to speak to a number of council members, and one of them is named Judas. He's heard about her revolutionary work of talking to the patients and wanted to say that he is impressed. Also, he mentions that that is the same kind of work that her sister Scarlet had been doing. He encourages her to keep doing it and gives her access to all of the patients' rooms. Despite this, Skylena still hates him because he lets the abuse go on, even though he's eager for these new treatment methods. We're then introduced to another patient who goes by Cupid. He's angry at Skylena for being like the other nurses who all laugh at him for his persona. They go to hydrotherapy, and there, Skylena cannot stand to see another patient tortured. So she strips off all of her clothing, stands against the wall, and says, "Take me instead." And when they're like, what? She's like, "Take me instead. Please, don't waterboard him." And so then they grab the hose and they hose her down, and she is probably biting on her lip the whole time, let's be honest. But then somebody comes in, I think it's Judas, yeah. Then Judas comes in and is like, what is going on here? And the nurses are like, she told us to do it. And he's like, everyone, get the frick out of this room. And so then Judas asks Skylena what happened. And she said, well, I asked them to waterboard me because I needed to prove to Cupid that he can trust me and that I'm not one of them. And also, I don't want bad things to happen to the patients. So I took the treatment instead. Judas is #proud. Skylena then goes back to the room with Cupid, whose real name is Niles, and she confesses that she's there to continue her sister's vision of changing the treatments in the asylum. Niles gives the backstory of his life, where he was sold into child slavery and prostitution, acting like it's somehow rare despite even Skylena's sister being put into it. Women are not really seen as important or valued in this scenario, and it seems like rape is very common here. Then he reveals that once he slept with a woman who had a penis. Also, that woman, it turns out she used to be Niles' father, and he only found that out after they'd had sex together for a while by finding a necklace that belonged to his mother. I have to take a pause right here to say that is the beginning and ending of that section, and any section in this book that has any trans character in it. And so if you see complaints about transgender characters in this book, that is literally it. It's about a page and a half, if that, and it never comes up again. So if you get a newer version of this book, this section has been taken out because of outrage online and the author saying, I'm sorry, and taking it out of the book. Really. So Niles is in the asylum because he abducted people, put them in a basement, and waited until they fell in love with each other. I thought that I'd read somewhere that, like, he would wait until one would rape the other one because that proved, like, and then they would start bonding and one would protect the other one. But I think I made that up as I was reading because it somehow made sense to me, but I'm not entirely sure. Skylena wins Niles' friendship by being like, well, you know, Niles, I like you more than I like Cupid. Will Niles be my friend? And he's like, hex yes. So of course, what is the first thing that Skylana does after befriending Niles? She asks about Mr. Big Dick himself, patient 13. Like, clearly that's what was going to happen. Time skip to a brief flashback of Skylana being in pain, locked in a basement, and someone reaches a hand in to help her out. Auric wakes Skylana up and takes her down to breakfast, informing her that her success with Niles and Shekis has caused the hospital board to want her to go and start putting in work with patient 13. And now we know that it's panty dropping time. At work, Sky says she prefers to work with the patients over being around these sane people, and Shekis warns her that he's worried that patient 13 might be way too dangerous for her to handle. You know, everyone's afraid of him because he checked himself into the asylum, and legit only crazy people would do that. He also asked them to make sure that he could never get out. We'll find out later that they failed at that massively. Before going to patient 13, Skylana wants to meet with his old ward, Cern, who definitely broke her neck while having crazy wild sex with him because... I mean, have you seen this guy? So she asks what Cern knows about patient 13, and Cern's like, don't be afraid, but he's expecting you. He knows, like, all the freaking stuff about you. Cue to Sky now being led to patient 13's room where she's excited because of the rumors that she's heard about him, probably that he's got a big dick. She's thinking to herself, it feels like I have a divine purpose here. I want to stop right here and hold on to this tight moment because it'll never come back. Maybe finally meeting patient 13 will remove this obsession that I have with him. The nurse leading Sky to the room warns her that he's super dangerous, has a split personality, he's insane, and throws in whatever other scary, crazy words that she can. And all Sky does is go, but what's his name, though? It's Dessin. They go into the room, and Dessin's chained to a bed. Sky is like, this is horrible. Why would you do this to yourself? Also, as you might expect, she's like, wait, I thought he'd be old and, like, ugly and, like, scary, but he's like... How is he so hot? The nurse also warns Sky that this guy somehow knows all about her, and also they don't know anything really about him because he burned all of his own records before checking himself in. Unrelated, but Sky also notes he smells like trees, and it reminds her of her childhood for some reason. Skylana then steps into the room, and Destin's immediately cocky and amused, watching Skylana and only Skylana. He completely ignores the nurse until he tells the nurse to get the freak out. First with threats, and then by telling her that he knows that her husband is having an affair, and if she leaves now, she can catch him. So she leaves, and obviously it is now D-time. Alone, Dessin now teases Skylana, tries to scare her away, but she's not super worried about it, and then Dessin gives Skylana an education on what it means that he's got split personalities. He tells her all of the terminology, says what triggers are, and all of this stuff, and Skylana, despite being the one in the position of mental health care, is just like, tell me all of what is wrong with you because I'm not a professional and I'm just going to believe you. Once he's done doing that, Skylana asks Dessin what he thinks of her. He tells her pretty flatly, and she goes, well, aren't you being kind of judgmental when you've only known me for like 2 minutes? And Dessin is like, 2 minutes? Dude, I've been stalking you for a while now. Enter into some exposition about the world as told by Auric. Then Sky tells Auric how she spent time with Dessin, and she is thirsty as frick. She returns to Dessin's room the next day at the hospital, where he talks about his experiences when he first arrived at the hospital and how the patients were killing themselves due to the treatments. The two play a game of trading secrets until Skylana says, I don't think my sanity survived childhood. Dessin laughs to prove that he doesn't heart, but Sky is like, no, I'll prove you have a heart. I'll find it. And then Dessin goes both rigid and rigid. Skylana meets with Dessin, and the next morning... There are so many innuendos in this that... It's hard to overlook. I already want to apologize. We're not even that far in, and I already want to apologize for this. Skylana meets with Dessin the next morning, and now he's covered in bruises. He reveals that he's not truly tied down to the bed and can escape whenever he wants because the hospital is totally incompetent. Sky starts asking him questions, but they're interrupted as a head nurse admits to have flogging Dessin last night for no apparent reason whatsoever. Dessin doesn't want to see anyone today, so he climbs out of bed. The nurse faints from panic because she doesn't want to face this guy, and he just leaves, running down the hall. Skye is still there and is blamed for the state of chaos that is now the hospital. This older male employee draws his hand back to smack Skylena because obviously she needs to be put in her place. She is not doing her job. But then Dessin shows up out of nowhere to threaten Skylena with like a knife against her throat and tell the dude he needs to go away and not hurt Skylena, because if he tries to hurt Skylena, well then Dessin will kill Skylena. So then the employee runs away. Also, I need to mention that Dessin brought his swelling veins to the scene. that was important to mention. So with the employee gone, Dessin's like, let's run off together. The two of them disappear into like a bunker-style secret room thing that Dessin's got underneath the ground, and the two of them just hang out for a while, waiting until nighttime before going back upstairs, because they're just gonna kind of hang out. Also, apparently, the government has no control over what happens in an asylum, because that would be a violation of church and state somehow, because apparently the asylums are a religious structure, so the asylums get to run however they want, even though some of the people that were going to come and visit were political figures that were checking on the internals of the asylum. So that's kind of confusing. Skye asks what they're going to do now as they wait through the evening, and Dessin's like, I don't know, just hang out until the end of day. Skylena is like, do you want to maybe talk? And Dessin is like, dude, I just kidnapped you and you want to talk? And she's like, well, are you going to hurt me? And he's like, only if you make me. And she's like, that sounds like an invitation. And so then she scoots closer to him. Now enter some backstory about the asylum operations through Dessin, run by prejudiced, religious, narcissistic supremacists. The asylum caters to treating people with torture while believing they're possessed by Satan, and torture is the only way to get the devil out. Skylena then returns home to Ulrich, who is worried because he heard about the situation at the asylum. He asks, concerned, if Skylena was raped, and then reveals that his ex-fiancée was raped by his father. He then badgers Skye for her experiences at the hospital, so she tells him about everything not concerning Dessin, and while you would think that this would make Ulrich suspicious, since Ulrich was the one that informed her she'd be working with Dessin today, and he heard about the situation with Dessin, he doesn't ask any questions of why she doesn't tell him anything about Dessin. I would be suspicious. Skye goes out into the woods to just walk around by herself at night in the dark because that helps her get rid of her depression. Out there, she is attacked by a creature called a Dopper, rescued by some wild dog thing that jumps on the guy, and then Ulrich shows up with a gun and misses when he tries to shoot the dog. It runs off and Ulrich is angry because Skye made him miss. He is also just concerned about Skye's well-being because she's bleeding, but she smiles even though she's been attacked because she likes being in danger. At work, Judas wants her to be evaluated for trauma following the Dessin incident. Instead of being evaluated at work, though, he's going to have one. He's sending her to go and see a private doctor or a retiree of the hospital staff. When talking with the hospital staff, she defends Dessin while in that session and says the only thing still clinging to her that is causing issues are her childhood traumas. This should have been a red flag to any specialist that she was bonding too hard with a patient. It probably should have been taken away because obviously she can't think clearly and it's going to get dangerous for her to continue to work with Dessin. However, that doesn't happen, and the lady sends Skye off with a clean bill of health, even as she says, I'd like to help you with your childhood. Skye laughs it off and says, my secrets are my own, bitch. The next day, Skye's called to a 6-person council meeting with a board at the hospital. She listens to them talk about each of them putting Dessin to death for what he's done. Skye appeals to one of them by bringing up his children, going, if your son was Dessin, wouldn't you want somebody to fight for him? Because Skylena has the power to change anyone's mind, Boss Guy is like, all right, your boyfriend is saved now, but just try to work with him. She signs a liability waiver so that she can keep working with Dessin. It seems like she should have signed that on day 1 before being put in a room with him, like at all, but okay. So immediately she's frothing, literally staring at Dessin's crotch once she gets back to his room. They play another game of dumping information on each other. I'll tell you about my past if you tell me yours. She asks Dessin why he keeps tying himself to the bed, and he says it's because he didn't want to scare her. So he would just put her in a false sense of security by tying himself to a bed. She helps him sit up and free himself, and he stares at her crotch now, and she's like, I'm in danger, while literally getting the bed wet with how much she is juicing in this scene. He says she doesn't know everything, and she's like, I should be afraid, but I'm actually just like really horny right now. Sky's stomach growls, and Dessin says that she's going to eat before they play any of the background story game. Skylena tells Dessin that she'll only eat if he eats, and he agrees. So she leaves the room to go to the cafeteria and pick up some food for them to eat, but on her way back, she runs into some of the ladies, the other nurse ladies, that invite her to come and drink tea and talk tea. While having tea, once she's done with that, she returns back to Dessin fairly quickly, and very shortly after that, she starts going down on the ground with sickness because those nurses had poisoned her. She vomits everything back up in the toilet, and once she has recovered, Dessin is obviously very, very pissed off. Oh yeah, they also play a game about telling each other the truth, and Skylena tells Dessin that her father beat her, and she wandered into the woods to almost kill herself when Scarlet showed up randomly. Then it was the two of them. Dessin tells Skylena about this abandoned warehouse on a dangerous side of town that he wants Skylena to go to if she wants to find out more about his past and to find more about herself. Skylena is literally like, I'll do it because I like you so much. I'd walk on grenades for ya. Yeah, that was actually in the text. I kind of wondered if she was listening to that song while doing this. So Sky leaves Dessin's room and sees the nurses who poisoned her. They're like, what the frick? You're supposed to be dead, bitch. It needs to be highlighted here that Skylena knows what they did to her. She giggles at them and says, I'm glad that we've come to an understanding, but it's my turn now. So this will be important for when she's trying to play coy later that she's not a psychopath. Skylena then goes to the abandoned building that Dessin told her to. It's destroyed by warfare from 10 years ago, and she climbs up the stairs to the room that Dessin told her to go in, and there she finds a letter, her initials, and a hobo wanting to rape her. Fortunately, this whole time, where Dessin sent her to a dangerous place in the city, he was also stalking her for just such an occasion so that he could murder a hobo that would try to jump her in this situation. As they're leaving, Skylena is like, why did you follow me? You know, he could have just escorted her there. She should have been asking, if you were going to be here, why didn't you just come with me? And he's like, I don't know, because we're playing coy, apparently. Then Skylena hugs him, and things are all better. Dessin asks where her host, Auric, thinks she is, and she should be at home right now. And she's like, well, I told him that I was going to go and see my dad's grave. And he's like, oh, you lied to your housekeeper? Man, your home borrower man? Skylena says she put herself in danger for Dessin's benefit and trust before asking Dessin how many people he's killed like it's absolutely nothing. Nothing for her or for him as a patient who possibly has a fractured personality because of the trauma that he's been through that may include, murdering people. But Skylena really is not a healthcare professional in any kind of way and shouldn't be allowed around patients. I feel like generally she's just going to make everything worse if we're being honest. She talks to them, sure, but she also has no tact. Dessin tells Sky that she's too trusting and good-natured and forgiving, and it's dangerous for her. You need to stop being such a good person. He then pushes her into a wall because sexual tension. She wants to tell him to stop because she can sense the Pound Town coming, but she also, wants it, really bad. She's kind of been waiting for this. He's like, tell me to stop, baby, and I will. She's moaning, but not saying no, and then Dessin's still the one that pulls away even though she didn't tell him to stop. So clearly, there's no follow-through on that either. He says, I need to keep you safe. And Skylena's thinking, and I need you to bang me. But instead she says, I can handle whatever you can. Then Dessin disappears. Back at Auric's house, Skylena climbs into the attic window because she didn't want Auric to see her coming home late. Apparently that's better than him not seeing her come home at all. And she lays on the couch and reads the letter that she found in the warehouse. It contains a cross necklace and is addressed to the Leatherman. This message really doesn't matter, and I don't think it ties into anything ever again. Auric then appears and startles Sky. There is a tall man who introduces himself as Mastin. He's a friend to Auric. Immediately, he makes Sky nervous. This is how you know he's evil and a bad guy. Her senses are tingling even before anything happens. Auric asks Skylena what she's doing in the attic and why she's soaking wet. It was raining outside. Mastin asks Auric, have you really not trained her on the house rules yet? Ugh, your leniency is weakness. Train her, you fool. Obviously, Sky doesn't like Mastin laying his big dick rules down and treating her like an unkempt and unmannered little shit, so she yells, I'm not his wife. Mastin then grabs Sky by the hair and says, "You're undermining your host by talking like this. You're lucky that I don't have a paddle to smack you with, Pratt." And she's like, "Oh my gosh, a paddle? Is that a thing? Punishment? Is punishment real?" So I'm going to get into this later. But it's like there's no consistency on what is the normalized culture of this. Because even if she lived out in the bush, she should be mildly aware of how like what is normalized behavior inside the city, especially because like everybody apparently beats everybody. Her dad even beat her. So this is one of those areas where it doesn't make sense in the context of its own story, where is abuse normalized or is it not normalized? And how does this character know that paddling is bad and abnormal from her point of view if literally everybody gets punished all the time, especially women, by their male holders? Mastin then releases Skylena and sees himself out, wishing Auric a good night. Auric dismisses Skylena to do her nightly doll duties. In her room, she pleads with her dead sister, to give her the strength to not be beaten by another man. The next day at work, Skylena is working with Niles, thinking about the situation with Mastin and Auric and trying to get rid of the anxiety before going to see Dessin. Niles asks if Sky believes in soulmates, and she's like, "I don't know, man." Then she thinks about her relationship with Auric and how she's got no place to call home without him, so she has to keep appeasing him. Moving on to Dessin, he notices Skylena's got a new necklace made of an apology diamond. Auric had just given it to her that morning due to the way that Mastin had treated her. Dessin then asks what's on her mind, and she shares what Mastin did to her that night. Obviously, Dessin's bloodlust is rolling and he's ready to murder another person. Skylena asks if normally women are physically disciplined by men in society, and Dessin is like, yes, though he doesn't believe in it. So again, how does she not know that women are, one, usually punished in society, because even her father punished her basically, and then two, how does Dessin have a higher plane of thinking? Like, maybe if she didn't know that it was wrong and Dessin stepped up to be like, no, this is wrong, and she could be like, why? And he could be like, because you have dignity, because you have value, because you shouldn't be beaten. Like, if you had that contrast, it would have been great. But when you've got this chick who lives outside of everything, but also somehow inside of things and doesn't know, but does know, but she's ignorant of, like, all of the culture, literally, and can tell what is right from wrong when it's supposed to be normalized, and she's even gone through it, and we don't ever get a reason as to how she recognizes what is abnormal, and we don't ever get a reason as to how Dessin recognizes what is abnormal in society. And it would have just been an interesting thing to have that cultural clash to pull her out of. But I digress. To calm Dessin's blood rage down, Skylena asks him if he believes in soulmates, and he says he hadn't thought about it, but he hopes there's somebody out there who will love him. This would have been also a great moment for him to foreshadow how he felt that he was meant to be with Sky, rather than just playing coy and vague for the sake of keeping the reader in the dark, or for being like, well, they won't they? Because we know that they will. Outside of any of these moments, to make characters read more real and make sense, understanding that they have a life and desire outside of what is happening currently in the scene is the best way for padding their behaviors and making logical sense of those behaviors. Skylena then talks to Dessin about the letter that she got from the warehouse. She touches him, he touches her back and asks about her scars. She accuses him of manipulating her by pretending to know things about her just to get close to her. And he's like, how would you even know what friendship is when all you've ever been through is abuse? She leaves crying, and this conversation never comes up ever again. They don't mend it, they don't recognize it, they don't move on from it at all, because it acts like it never happened, when the confrontation of this could have been such a good character building moment for the both of them. Like, he just used sensitive information about her and her sensitive background to be like, you don't know what true friendships are, and they never reconcile it. It's like it never happened. And it's so disappointing, because that could have been such a character moment. Skylena retreats to Chekis and cries on him, wanting to tell him what happened, but thinking that that would mean acknowledging Auric might be evil, so she doesn't really want to, and just vague cries on him. Now, it's time for a new treatment demonstration. Basically, it's just an isolation tank where you put somebody in and you drug them up, and then they'll hallucinate, and maybe they'll start screaming, and you kind of just float them in this isolation sensory deprivation tank. And instead of trying this out on a patient, which would make way too much sense, the head nurse asks for volunteers, And also, despite this being a torture, you've got a couple of not head nurses volunteer to be put in, but then of course the head nurse wants to torture Skylena, so she picks her instead. Now this is kind of bizarre because all of the nurses know that this is a torture device. So one, why would any of the nurses volunteer themselves for this? Two, you know what would have made more sense, because they're all picking on Skylena, if they go, hey, who volunteers? And the nurses went, Skylena wants to do it, instead of them saying themselves, and then they helped shove her into that pod. Now you also know that this is a terrible thing because the head nurse hates Skylena and she's targeting Skylena. So that further proves that this is not supposed to be a positive exercise, as it were. So why would any of the nurses volunteer to put themselves in this pod when the head, who hates a certain somebody, is punishing her specifically? Also, the treatments are meant to push the devil out, so they're not going to be pleasant. So again, why would you volunteer for this? Honestly, this part of it also just read like torturing the main character for personal titillation style thing, because part of the savior complex is also the self-sacrifice complex, where you end up putting your character through a bunch of humiliation and torture to make them look stronger, because they keep going through these nasty things and coming out with either being protected by their man, or they're protected by their man and they're stronger and they have a reason for revenge. So it really just feels like a juice flowing kind of thing. Anyway, Skylena is shoved into the machine, and then she starts dreaming about her sister, where her sister comes up and starts saying, save me from hell, where I'm being used as basically a rape doll and everybody is just having their way with me. The two of them sing the Lord's, or recite the Lord's Prayer together. I always think of it as singing because of that Carmen song. So once they're doing the Lord's Prayer, then Dessin comes into the rescue, pulls her out. It turns out that all of the nurses and all of the staff left the room after putting Skylena in the pod, but now that she's not screaming anymore, the head nurse comes back in and she's like, oh, well, we were gonna let you out when you stopped screaming, so that's why I came. And Dessin, though you'd think that he would be like bloodlust engaged, is kind of just standing there. The nurse also doesn't seem to notice that Dessin is there. I mean, she does. She's like, oh, hi, Dessin. But she's also like, oh, hey, by the way, us nurses are having a special dinner party tomorrow night at my house. Do you want to come, Skylena? And she's like, well, I don't want to be rude, so yes. And then the nurse is like, great. And then without even trying to put Dessin back in his room or deal with any of this situation, she just leaves like a true professional. So then Dessin is like, hey, I don't want you to go to that dinner because it feels like a trap. And Skylena is like, okay, that's reasonable, but also I kind of want to go. And Dessin is like, promise me that you won't go. And Skylena is like, okay, I won't go. Skylena has a quick meeting with Judas where he asks if she's ready to work with Dessin in the long term, and she agrees. The next day, Skylena goes to the dinner party because even though she told Dessin she would not be going, she is going to be there. She meets a nurse named Ruth, who's a new person at the facilities that she hasn't met yet, and they kind of bond over being in that area together. They go to dinner. The whole night, Skylena is warning Ruth that everything may be poisoned, so don't eat, don't drink, don't be part of any of it. Then they head over to the table where the head nurse says she used to date Ulrich, and she is glad that Skylena's got her sloppy seconds. She makes a toast to her own generosity of handing off her ex-boyfriend, and because there's always an obvious sort of humiliation fetish in this type of wish fulfillment romance fantasy. Dessin shows up at the last minute and tells Skylena to put her glass down. He teases the nurse about how she's attracted to him because everybody's got the hots for his big fat dick. Then he threatens their families and tells them all to eat and drink the food that they have prepared. Everyone in the room, orderlies and nurses, all start vomiting red violently, and Dessin takes Ruth and Sky away. Once they're outside, Dessin assures Skylena that he did not kill them, and the poison that he put in their food was only red. They were only vomiting red because the poison that he put in their food also contained a root that interacted with chemicals in their stomachs to make it look red. Now, I'm going to call BS on that because after this scene, we never see any of the characters that were named in this scene ever again for the rest of the book. So I'm pretty sure they're dead, and he lied to Skylena about not killing them. But that's just my theory. Let me know what you think down below. Skylena then introduces Ruth to Dessin, and then they go their separate ways. Ruth is too shaken up and says that she can't lie to her family about what happened tonight. So so she asks if she can stay with Skylena instead. The two girls retire to Skylena's place with Ulrich, and they have baths together, and they do their doll routine together, and they go to sleep. The next morning, Ruth's not there, and Mastin is sitting at the edge of Skylena's bed with tea and something to say. But it doesn't go anywhere because Skylena is summoned by Ulrich, since the asylum needs her right this second. Mastin departs by saying, "You look nothing like her," assuming that he means her twin sister, but I'm pretty sure they do look alike because it says they did earlier on. And this never comes up again, by the way, so we don't even get this addressed. And I know this is a series, like a trilogy at least, but I don't think Mastin makes it out of this book alive either. Because this is the last time we see him in this book. Maybe he'll come back in book 3. At the asylum, Skylena is greeted by Judas outside, saying that Dessin is not acting like himself. She runs inside to see him as he's being electrocuted with shock therapy. She literally jumps on top of him to pull the conductors off his head. However, orderlies pull her off him, and this ignites Dessin's berserker rage mode so that he fights everyone off. Sky asks what happened to Dessin, and a nurse is like, "I don't know, I'm just following orders." She tells everyone to get out of the room while feeling like she wants to hurt everyone, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I've never felt like this before in my head, ever. I've never wanted to hurt people." Girl, I'm pretty sure you looked at the nurses earlier and said,
"I'm coming for you, bitch."
Pretty sure that happened. Once everyone is quieted down and gone, Dessin asks Sky if she's hurt. She says no. Skylena then begins dumping background information about being abused by her dad onto Dessin. Dessin admits to having already known all of that, but he just didn't want to tell her he knew because he wanted her to feel comfortable enough to tell him herself. Dessin then shares how he speaks every single language on the planet and is basically a completely overpowered character who knows chemistry, biology, weaponry, fighting, everything in the world there is to know, and he's in the asylum hiding from the government despite his ability to literally kill anything that he wants, anytime he wants, with a bunch of special abilities. He says he's just buying time there until something, and that they can't come and get him there since the asylum is protected with religious liberty. No, it doesn't really make sense, does it? So Dessin says that one of his other personalities found something to live for, and then he's asking Skylena if she slept with Ulrich. She acts coy about not knowing, what kind of terminology is that? And once Sky finally just says no, she did not sleep with Ulrich, he warns her not to trust him. Though Skylena says she trusts Mastin way less than Ulrich. The two of them chatter until Judas comes by, saying, so the treatments must still be done, even if you've stopped them. And so Skylena and Dessin then spend the evening together eating and talking. When she goes home, she's late and sees liquor bottles all over the floor. She's worried that Ulrich could be just like her father, a drunkard, and beating her, but she still goes into the room to check on him and make sure he's all right. They get into a fight because he's jealous and wants to have sex with her. He's like, do you know how hard it is for me to live in this building with you when I want to sleep with you and I can't sleep with you, and I thought that you would like me if you slept here long enough so that I could bang you? And she's so naive that she didn't realize that he wanted to sleep with her, and it's been torture for him to live there. She tries to leave the room, but Ulrich says that she better not, and then slaps her hard across the face. She breaks down crying and runs away, and Ulrich folds onto the floor in shame and vomits all over himself because he's drunk. And that's the end of that. At work, everyone is trying to ignore how swollen Skylena's face is, but obviously when she gets to Dessin, he's like, what happened? Who did that to you? And she's like, you know who it was. And obviously Dessin is murder ready. That's not enough for Skylena though, and she accuses Dessin of keeping her at the asylum in order to make sure that she was late so that she would get hurt, and he's being a manipulator. She should have said this when he sent her to the abandoned warehouse. What in any of this book has there been to even pretend that Dessin wants Skylena to get hurt? It's just her incoherently screaming to cause false conflict and be overdramatic, because that's her thing. He's not actually doing anything. I mean, sending her to that abandoned asylum was like, are you stupid? But I think he wanted a hero moment because he was literally right there behind her the whole time. Dessin says he kept her there late because he wanted to keep her away from Mastin since he didn't trust Mastin, and he knew that Mastin had been eyeing her. Despite how 24 hours ago he told Skylena not to trust Ulrich because Ulrich would hurt her, he still in this specific moment says, I couldn't have known that Ulrich would take it to that extreme with you. Bro, did you forget what you said 24 hours ago? So they're still both more worried about Mastin eyeing her like a shark and waiting to pound that meat. But Dessin also tells Skylena not to worry about Mastin anymore because he's not a problem. This is why I'm like, well, Mastin is probably gone for good. So everything in that previous thing with like him bringing the tea and wanting to talk to her, yeah, we're probably never going to hear about that situation ever again. He was such a useless, wasted character. So the same night that Dessin was trying to keep Skylena out super long so that she wouldn't run into Mastin is the same night that Dessin also snuck into Mastin's house to cut off his balls. I don't know about the timeline, if the timeline of this is making sense. I mean, I guess, because if Skylena was at home, then Mastin was at home and he could just bloop bloop, but I'm questioning too many things right now. Skylena finally asks Dessin why he cares so much about her, and he says that there's a guy in his head who cares about her. So Skylena is super impressed that this personality she's never met cares about her, and she is super flattered and maybe more in love with that personality than she is with Dessin. But this whole thing comes off more like it's literally just Dessin saying, I like you, without personally saying, I like you. Like, I know this guy. I know this guy who kind of sort of likes you, but it's not me. I'm telling you for a friend. Next, Dessin goes through the treatment that was promised by Judas, while Skylena cries in a closet because it's so upsetting. Somehow, despite all of the bad behavior and Dessin being warned that if he even looks at someone funny, it's execution time, the hospital decides to give them a key and 2 hours of free roaming outside every day. He and Skylena go outside and eat, and Dessin kind of lectures her about staying with Auric, but she's thinking in her head, you know, the only reason that I'm working here and I have a place to stay is because of Auric. I'm suffering and putting myself in danger for you, bae. I told you, it's part of the savior complex thing. It makes so much sense if you just accept that, like, everything she does is for a savior kink. Dessin questions Skylena about how she can still deal with Auric despite how he's treated her, even though he knows that Skylena loved her father and still loves her father despite the abuse that he put her through, but whatever. Skylena takes this moment to think about all of the pain that she's inflicted upon herself for other people's benefits. That is, she doesn't want Dessin to go into a murderous rage, so she needs to keep this job so that he doesn't get executed. Dessin's like, fine, but if you're going back to that house, I'm gonna teach you how to fight. So then he teaches her how to fight. This is never used against Auric. She never has to fight Auric, but maybe that comes in one of the further future books. Now, I don't know where this came from, but Skylena announces that Auric is taking her to a grand ball that was never mentioned anywhere else in the book. Then she's hanging out with Dessin, and he's like, you can ask me anything you want, but I have a couple of things that I'll veto. So enter another game of literally her just asking him questions for him to answer. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be character building, but it didn't really work, and I'll give an example of what this looked like later when we get to the notes at the end. When Skylena's giving information about herself, she mentions her scars, and Dessin doesn't believe that she has them. This is just an excuse to get Skylena to coyly lift her dress and show them off, and then gets confused when Dessin is like, don't, because he's embarrassed that she is stripping before him. Again, we got more of that humiliation kink. Once that's over, it's time to attend the ball, and Skylena is worried that Auric will get drunk and act like her father again. He goes off to get something to drink, and Skylena runs into Ruth. Eventually, Dessin shows up, and the two of them dance for a while. While they're dancing, Auric returns to Skylena, and the two of them, Auric and Dessin, have like a dick measuring contest where Dessin is like, if you hurt her again, I will cut off your balls and feed them to you and make her watch me as I do it. Skylena can't even pretend to not be pooling on the floor right then and there because she doesn't even say, no, please don't do that, D. Of course, of all things, she wanted the D most right there, right now. But the scene cuts and Dessin is on the roof. The two of them exchange a quip about like jumping off the roof together. Then Dessin asks Skylena when she is going to leave and stop living with Auric. She just thinks in her head, I can't leave him. I'm living there for you, for your benefit, but I can't tell you that, as if Dessin wouldn't run away with her tomorrow if she was like, okay, I'll stop living with him, but I have nowhere to go. And he'll be like, okay, fine, let's go. Dessin is depressed that Skylena is leaving herself in danger, but he's not going to fight her over it. He just says, you know, you look really pretty, and then he leaves the roof. At work, Judas pulls Sky aside to tell her that she's got 1 week left before the council comes back to check on Dessin's status, and if he has not broken through and gotten to that other, at least one of his other personalities, then he will be put to death, because that is what is going on here. She's also given a bronze key so that she can theoretically take him out of the hospital. I think that is what happened, but the book didn't really clarify from what I remember. Skylena then goes to Dessin, flirting and telling him that she wants to get out of there. The two of them leave, and Dessin's got a motorcycle, so they ride off into the woods and they go swimming for a little while. They play another game of exchanging information. They blue ball Dessin some more, with Skylena pretending that she is innocent and doesn't know what she's doing to him. And as they're leaving the forest, they run into two suspicious-looking randos who were saying that they were making out in trees, hiding from their parents, but you shouldn't believe them. We also got a flashback to Skylena telling her sister that despite what she's been through, she can still marry and fall in love and have a family if she wants. She mentions Scarlet was super miserable, so she tried to lift her spirits the same way that she would lift her own or had her own lifted, by making a blueberry pie. Or making a blueberry pie together. However, they don't have any blueberries, so Skylena leaves her sister and then goes out to hunt for blueberries by herself. When she comes back, or came back, when she came back, her sister had hung herself, and yeah. Skylena asks Dessin why she's drawing puppets every day all the time obsessively, and Dessin is like, "You're probably thinking of your sister," and then he comforts her. Dessin then tells Skylena how he got his split personalities, which was due to when he was 6 years old, a couple of bandits or agents of the state or something came into his house, tied up his mother, brutally raped her in a bunch of different ways, in overly descriptive ways, if I'm honest with you, for this type of book. And then they brought out his kid brother and said, okay, either kill your mother or kill your brother. So Dessin then killed his mother, and then the agents killed his little brother for him. And then he was taken away, and apparently this was all part of an experiment that his father sold him out to without telling him. And this is how he became basically a military weapon of the state, is this was the start of his cracking of his personality. They took him away and they did all of this training, and then he escaped, and that's why he's hiding from the government, and that's how he knows every language, and that's why he's amazing. For the record, the two creepy, weird people that we're talking about being teenagers, hiding from their parents, having a moment in the trees that they ran into, Dessin was ready to kill them, but Skylena was like, please no, don't. And so he was like, get the fuck out of here and don't let me see you again. Back at the hospital the next day, Skylena is thinking about how she and Dessin made a breakthrough last night when she hears people gossiping saying, you know, Skylena is not going to like this. Immediately, she fears for Dessin and runs to see him, but he's fine. Dessin then asks Skylena if she feels the bond between them, and Skylena is like, yes, ever since day one. A hospital worker appears at the door and tells them both that the officials are here to put Dessin to death, since he's shown no improvement. Now enter a fight scene where Dessin is like taking out this load of orderlies and guards and whatnot that come into the room to take him away, and then Skylena is trying to distract some of them, specifically this guy named Martin who works at the facilities. And so while there's a lull in the mob of workers coming in here, Skylena is like, I'll distract them. Dessin, meet me under the stars, as a coded way of telling him to run and go and meet her. And he won't run. He just looks at her and he's like, what? What are you talking about? And she's standing there crying to herself now that she's like, oh no, I have to do the worst thing that I've ever done because I have to get him to go, and I can't just tell him, leave, Dessin, leave. I have to get him to go, and I could never see him again. Because she screams, Dessin, I hate you. Won't you just leave me alone and go? And Dessin is still like, but he still walks out the door. I just imagine him being like, okay. And then he leaves. And then she like collapses on the ground and she's like, I'll never see him again, and I'm never gonna tell him how I actually feel. He thinks that I hate him. But then Martin, who is on the ground, gets up and he's like, bitch, we're gonna go after that guy. So he grabs Skylena, doesn't even tie her hands up or anything. He drags her out to his car, where he throws her in the car, and then they drive after Dessin. And obviously, this guy knows exactly where Dessin is, because those two creep factor people from like the night before were his spies that somehow just so happened to know where they needed to go in order to, like, they're acting like these people gave the information of where the hiding spot was. But how did they know where the hiding spot was? Anyway, doesn't matter. Probably because they tailed him. Whatever. Doesn't matter. So Martin drives his car down to go and pick up pick up Dessin, even though he doesn't even use Skylena as like a hostage situation or anything. So the two of them fight, and then this wild dog comes out of nowhere. Oh, that was it. That was it. Martin and Skylena catch up. Dessin obviously takes Martin down and is going to kill him when Skylena pleads for him not to. So then this wild dog comes out of the woods and drags Martin into the woods where he is murdered and eaten, maimed, whatever you want to call it. So Dessin didn't have to do it, but Dessin's pet still went and done it. Skylena makes the realization that Dessin's afraid of losing her. This was the thing that made him not want to kill Martin, but brings out his original personality named Kane. The two of them then flee with Kane/Dessin carrying Skylena for a day until the three of them arrive, I guess the two of them arrive at a treehouse. Dessin tells Skylena about this time that he escaped from the asylum, heard her screaming in the woods, and followed it. He tells her that he saved her from being beaten to death by her father, and that was the day that he fell for her. It gave him a second chance to protect a woman when he failed at protecting his mother first. Also, after he took her away from her father killed himself. He returned to the scene and Dad was dead. Skylena asks if Dessin still exists since Kane is fronting right now, and they're both like, lol, yes. And Skylena is super excited that nothing has actually changed or healed or anything. It's just she can now flirt with two men in the same body. I just gotta ask if this is like, does this count as a reverse harem? If it's all one person? The two of them pass out, and when Skylena wakes up, she's alone in the treehouse. But just in time, Dessin has come back from the asylum saying that he set Niles and Check free. They celebrate the freedom, and then Kane switches personalities to someone immediately flirty who you know is going to be lewd and blue-balled, and then tells Sky that there are way more than 3 personalities in this body. And that is the end of book 1. Book 2 is currently out if you want to read that, and there is, the word cock is in there. Let's get into the comments. I told you it was going to be a long one. There was a lot of detail in there. So first things first about Asylum books. Asylum stories are rough to find, and I mean that in the way that the subject is handled, because quickly and often they're used for fetishizing and romanticization of mental illness and the setting of hospitalization. This is one such book like that. And I'm not saying that every book that touches on this setting or has romance within it set within the walls of an asylum fall into the fetishization. It just happens a lot. And I'm not demonizing that either, because it happens, and just wait as somebody is going to come up and, you know, rip apart my asylum story once it's eventually out. So I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying that asylum stories very easily fall into fetishizing and romanticizing the setting and being a sexy setting for various reasons. Anyway, finding good asylum stories that speak to me is kind of hard because I like the aesthetics, the history, the themes, the things that you can play with in these places, but it is difficult to find them written in the way that I enjoy consuming them in a not fetishizing and romanticism kind of way. So the next area that I want to talk about in general is world building. The world building in this book is kind of confusing and seems more for aesthetic and convenience, which falls more into, like I was telling you about earlier, with the imagine this as a romantic fantasy of just fulfillment and wish fulfillment, and then it makes so much more sense because we're just being in this moment to be titillated and have like a role play style setting. Which sucks because I think that this author has so many interesting ideas that just weren't developed into creating like a serious story as opposed to a romantic fulfillment story. I think she referenced on one of her ads that this is Tim Burton meets The Handmaid's Tale, and I could see what she was going for with that, but she didn't follow through because the world building isn't consistent in this book. It's things as simple as being told there's no electricity and they're driving buggies to suddenly Dessin having a motorcycle to, you know, bigger world issues. One of those bigger world issues, we're first introduced to the city life expecting women to be so skinny they're basically skin wrapped around bones. You skip meals, and if you have much weight on you at all, you're considered insane and thrown into the asylum. Bulimia's encouraged, and there's fainting couches all over the street because women often pass out from being malnourished all the time. You're also expected to keep up with the dollification regimens of soaking in a bath of milk and oil and stuff for an hour minimum every night to keep your skin soft and carry a parasol to keep your skin porcelain. Also, you're supposed to change dresses many times during the day to fit in with the time of day. Now, it's interesting and fair that this is set up to be normal in this universe. However, this breaks when this world also uses our world's version of insanity in addition to the above. People in the asylum aren't just those with a couple extra pounds or who betrayed city traditions. They are those who kidnapped people or were plucking out their own eyes or scratching themselves bloody or were sodomizing infants with bleach to clean them on the inside until they died. So you can't consider the crazy to be crazy and the normal to also be considered crazy and have it make sense in this world of a dystopian that you've created. We've lost the baseline of expectation for behavior and understanding and culture in this society. I think it would have been more interesting in the context of this book if everyone in the asylum was actually fairly normal and gave readers a point of reference of like normal in comparison to the people who run the place and seemed so totally insane in the behaviors that they found them normal. It would have been an interesting contrast that would have stood out and also would have given a moment for Skylena and Dessin to have that clash of two worlds where Skylena was still on the outside and still normalized like odd behaviors and bad behaviors and dangerous behaviors even. And then she met Dessin, who is not that and who is actually, you know, a good, strong person who is going against this broken stuff. And that could have been a very interesting contrast and a very interesting pair to explore. Another place the world building failure stands out is when Mastin appears at Oryx's house and pretty much anytime Skylena talks about abuse, because it's also pitched as Handmaid's Tale, and you'd think that Skylena would be aware of what the local culture is in the city. It's introduced that if you live in the boonies or do hard labor, you're not really expected to follow city culture, but that means that you are aware of city culture. So that could have been a reason for why Skylena avoided the cities to begin with, or why her dad wanted to live out in the woods. But she doesn't. Instead, when Mastin's pimping hand appears, she asks if men abusing women is normal, and everyone she talks to says yes, it is considered normal. But they personally are against it. I mean, even Oryx, who still believes he has some claim over Skylena, gives her an apology tool, so he knows that it's wrong, while also not being part of the regular culture, but also being part of the regular culture because he's kind of an aristocrat. It just made no sense how Skylena would be so naive to literally normalized abuse and have to ask everyone about if it was normal or not. I mean, even she and her sister were victims to it, but she was a victim to her dad specifically. Not saying that people can't disagree with the popular culture as moral versus immoral, but if all of the so-called good guys who ally with the main character have the correct morals to start, how do they know that they're moral when the status quo is abuse? This book tries to both make it seem normal and abnormal/evil at the same time. You can have characters wake up to the evil they've perpetuated when they see through the veil of what society has done, but this book just creates a conformists and the nonconformists based on who is good and who is bad with no in-between, and the bad guys basically laugh while being evil because they know. There's no facade of moral failing here. Speaking of the conformists, I actually liked that title a lot for the workers at the hospital. There were two problems with it, though. The one that I just stated, but also early on in the novel, one of the nurses tells Skylena that they don't believe any of the patients can ever be helped by the treatments. The treatments they do are torture and mostly just entertain the staff. Quote, "The end goal isn't really cure..." Though there are priests that would disagree. The purpose is to keep them away from civilization, to protect the public from them. They are natural-born killers. They don't have souls. Most would agree. Versus a later quote that said, "Of course. Now keep in mind that the purpose of treatment is not to be cruel or for anyone's entertainment. This has just been the way and the law of the asylum for decades." End quote. However, later, multiple times, nurses also say that they prefer one treatment over another because it gets better results. So, do these treatments give results or don't they? There's also a segment in here where it says that the asylum is a religious operation, and because of separation of church and state, the state can't tell the hospital what to do. But we're never shown anything that expresses religion in part of this society either. It felt like a vague reference to what is familiar for the author, that is Christianity, and put in there, but not not built into the story or the society. There are no Christian behaviors or Christian ideals or even manipulated Christianity anything in this book. It's just a vague reference to say this thing is here. We don't know anything about the politics of this universe, but again, using American scaffolding, it's just put in there with nothing that ties it into logical, consistent place. We're also told at one point that the people in the asylum are seen as being possessed by Satan and that the treatments are meant to get him out. But how does that work with the treatments that are ineffective and the asylums there that hold dangerous people outside of society? If the treatments are ineffective, then the name conformist doesn't work. I would have loved to see this book lean into the behavioral correction to the people to comply and join the city and just like conform to break them into this disgusting, broken, toxic behavior that everybody else is doing, like, because abuse begets abuse. So that would have been a great comment and a great world building onto this, to have abusers continue to abuse until they can get the next patient to abuse not only themselves but other people, and then you become a conformist yourself, you know? Maybe even they took other people from the outskirts and stuck them in to the asylums because they didn't conform to the city's standards. If we're also dealing with The Handmaid's Tale, how is it that Skylena had so much freedom to move around on her own? This book dramatizes rape and incest to an insane degree while also saying it's a casual part of society. I think there's a way that you can do this. The horror is in how normal it is to them, but how damaging it is, and that's what causes some of them to change. I don't know, but there were so many ways that this world could have been played with to build something rich, but the author just didn't invest to make it make sense to connect throughout the storyline. It was as convenient as it needed to be fulfillment fantasy. I'm also not sure what the maps at the front of the book added, because on my reading, they did nothing for me. But then again, I am usually not a fan of maps. I don't care about maps. They don't add anything to my reading situation, period. Also, Skylena having experienced a culture shock from going to the city from the woods and all of that would have been great content. Again, making somebody from the outside meet on the inside, or having some sort of maybe not as bad version of culture from living on the outside, but it's still not as good as like Dessin's, and then they could be combined and, you know, work it out. That would have been great. Character. So this section might be pretty brief because there's not a lot to say about most of the characters. You've got what's a typical cast in a wish fulfillment fantasy, in my opinion. The lead female, the lead male, the mean girls, the mean boys, and all of the main characters' allies who are more or less interchangeable. Skylena's your typical too good for this world female lead, overly empathetic, thinks she's nice, but makes a lot of comments proving otherwise, naive, coy, pretending. What even is flirting? Like, we're talking about what is even flirting. Like, never at fault, but constantly in trouble. Everyone wants to rape her or beat her, which gives her male lead a reason to randomly materialize and protect her, no matter where she is, even when he's supposed to be chained up to a bed. She's also the kind that hears someone is dangerous, and her first instinct is she needs to know more about them and get closer to them, and she will never be in any real danger ever. There is another sign of a wish fulfillment fantasy. She is the only one who can tame the monster who will destroy literally everyone else, but she will always be safe from him. Also, I don't want to overlook that Skylena perpetually makes herself a victim and martyr for other people who didn't ask for her to do that and didn't look for her to do it, but she is. Dessin is the overpowered super soldier love interest of a man. He knows all of the languages, all of the weapons, all of the science, and every woman wants to sleep with him. He's obviously got a big dick. It just doesn't come up until he teases the women about how much they want to sleep with him and uses his power over them. He's also completely obsessed with the main character, and his entire life and motivation revolves around the moment he first saw her, in this case, bringing her abused body out and dragging it from the wreckage. Niles and Chekis are just ways for Skylena to show that she's not like anyone else, since she talks to the patients and they become friends. Then everyone else in the book is a typical bad guy. The girls are all mean and catty, and the men are all dismissive, if not downright abusive, or they're a nice guy who's jealous that you're sleeping in his house but not sleeping in his bed. But even Auric doesn't stick to his character, where he's pretending to be upper class with decorum for very long. The second you're supposed to assume he's bad, he's literally spitting while he talks. There's no follow follow up through for characters and then watching them break, it's a switch. Judas is the only one to question, but he gave Skylena a key to take Dessin out, and she later got in trouble for doing that, so I don't know whose side he's on. They're all pretty much stock characters, and if you hate random sexual tension that blue balls and girls taking their clothes off, then being like, what's wrong? And I wonder how he'd react if I was naked. You'll get that here. There are times when Skylena actually does come off as manipulative, which is only funny because Dessin is accused of being manipulative, but she legit watches him murder someone for her, and then she's surprised every time he goes out of his way to harm people who she told him had hurt her at some point. There are various spots of inner monologue where she acknowledges that people are her enemies and it's her turn, and then she turns to Dessin, says they hurt me, and then goes, well, why would he do that? How was I supposed to know? Skylena literally befriends the craziest, most unstable and dangerous guy in the asylum and then uses him to attack her enemies. She hates the nurses for their cruelty and pretends to be better than them, but she's fine with cruelty so long as it's her and her friends doling it out to the people that she doesn't like. So for as much as Skylena accuses Dessin of manipulating her, I actually think that she takes advantage of him, knowing what he does and that he's mentally an unstable person. She then treats his killing like it's literally nothing when she knows nothing about him. Yet, it's apparently the reason why, it's one of the reasons why he's in the hospital. Society's view on asylums. We actually don't get this at all in the book. Like, what do normal outsiders think of the asylums in society? What do they know about the treatments, if anything? This would have been helpful, but on that same note, Skylena's sister used to work at the asylum and tell her all of these things about her day, yet when Skylena gets there and acquires the job, she's confused, surprised, horrified by the practices that she sees, like she didn't know what was going on. She could have gotten away with, I was told that it was bad, but I didn't think it was that bad. But she just sounds completely ignorant as to what was happening in the asylum until she gets there, when we know what her sister did, and her sister had goals of changing how the asylum treated its patients. Again, more opportunism chosen instead of picking a path and following it through to make gradual change. The fact that they didn't have Skylena sign an NDA or some other kind of paperwork stating that she would not share treatment secrets also tells me they believe that what they're doing is normal. Also, society has normalized abuse, so why would they even think anything was wrong with what they were doing and saying, shh, don't tell anybody about this? I'm just mentioning this because it's hilarious. This book sets Skylena up to be the not like other girls against the entirety of society. She has the body that all women dream of, but she doesn't know how beautiful she is. She loves to eat and literally shoves her face full of food any chance she gets, but all the other girls don't because they want to be skinny. She rolls in the mud, they carry parasols in the sun. She doesn't like makeup, they wear makeup and literally dollify themselves by its standards. Every female, aside from Ruth, falls into this, and Ruth is introduced more than 60% of the way through the novel and plays no important role. She shows up at the dinner and then is mentioned in passing 2 or 3 times, but the story wouldn't have been different if she was removed. Maybe she was inserted just to make sure that every female character didn't hate Skylena, or maybe she plays a bigger role in future books, but I don't know. Anyway, I don't think there's anything intrinsically wrong with female characters who don't act typically or flip off society, but I think it's valuable to mention specifically thanks to the live chat for some streams when we talked about the not like other girls tropes. I think it's valuable to notice that one of the key factors in the not like other girls trope that makes it so kind of not great is the characters and or narrative believe that you are better than other girls because you're not like them. It's denigrating and insulting to the other females that you are not like them, but that is a shitty way to be. Not just that you act differently or have atypical interests. This being a fantasy and the main character being the savior to everyone in the asylum, making the whole of society enforce her not like other girlhood was just kind of really funny. Here are some quotes about her body though that you can take away from the text and give me what you think. Not for my weight, as growing up malnourished and starving has created quite a delicate frame for my body. I'm at risk for the golden hue of my skin, my long, wavy golden locks, and the absence of makeup on my face. Attractive, huh? I cross my arms. I've never compared myself to other women to know what is deemed attractive. I have the narrow hips and long legs that most women dream of, but my skin is slightly golden instead of paper white, and my bum isn't skin and bone. It's round and cushioned when I sit. How would one know if they are attractive with these outrageous beauty standards? I pull the rest of it off, my body fully exposed in only the white lace. I worry that it may be not appealing to a man. My breasts are decently sized, I'd say, enough to swell above my brassiere, enough to catch Oryx staring at my chest. Often. How would you not know if you're attractive when you've obviously just said that you've seen somebody else staring at your body as you take off clothing? Like, girl, please. There is a point, like, when you could take the purity thing too far, and you can take the opposite of the purity thing too far, and we are there. Moving on to the next area, there were some parts of awkward writing that I wanted to bring up. Before I get started, there is always room in any narrative for the unique style and voice of the author, so I don't normally talk about narrative choices, specifically since what works for me might not work for you, and there are so many variations of like usage of punctuation and uses of sentence structure and sentence pacing and all of that, but I did want to share some key quotes of bizarre choices and some just bad grammar that is not even just breaking the rules of like regular things. So here they are. Certain areas like, my forehead is burning and my arms tingling with social discomfort. My smile threatening to turn into a frown. That was a sentence all on its own. After, when you're doing an ing like that, it's going to be connected to another sentence. I wait for her to push the button impatiently, my heart vibrating like a power drill and the muscles over my stomach hardening like a plate of armor. I pretend hooks are cutting into the sides of my face, holding my facial muscles still, the skin stretched. My heart is going to explode, swelling up before pressing against my rib cage and bursting within me. My knees are quivering as if they're made from eggshells. The thought of meeting people like this turns my bowels watery. This is where I belong, I say, and despite the evil I've seen, I believe it to be true. I can't understand my own illogical reasoning, but walking down this hallway, running my fingers over the textured walls, there's a cosmic pull that is binding my soul to this place, a vortex that is sucking me in, deeper and deeper. My legs are shaking on the walk over, and a layer of skin stretches across my forehead, burns with anticipation. That voice, so deep and silky. If a bottle of bourbon could talk, this is what it would sound like. He's a genius and a murderer. In that chair, period, hanging on his lavender words. I immediately get the sense of dominance in the room that is surely not coming from her. An alpha wolf circling a member of its pack. I was not sure how this nurse, who is adversarial, was a member of his pack, so that kind of confused me. Can he smell the stress moistening the back of my neck like a bloodhound? It wasn't until the night I proposed to Red that he pinned her down and forced himself inside of her. So this one I specifically wanted to mention because he mentioned that his fiancée had been assaulted by his father at some point. And quotes like this read specifically like trauma porn. I'm not saying that there is not a place for this type of writing in some fiction, but it didn't feel appropriate for Oryx, who is just telling Skylena that his wife was assaulted. Like, he didn't need to go into detail to say, oh, and then he pinned her down and then he forced himself inside of her. Just, you said that she was assaulted. Just leave it at that. Depending on the context and the character voice of the whole story overall, by going into too much detail that also seems out of character detail, it ends up feeling like it is just there to be titillating or to be shocking, as opposed to remaining in character and being consistent with character. Especially if you know that, one, Skylena is sensitive, she's a nurse, she's working with trauma, her sister was constantly assaulted. There's really no reason if you're explaining somebody else's assault to go into details of any kind. You just, I proposed to Red and then my father sexually assaulted her. The end. Going back to quotes, I'm elated with fluttering wings erupting from inside my organs, soaring through my veins. And there are just some choices in metaphors in this book that are also interesting. Anyway, moving on. Lack of character motivation was a problem in here. So this is a common problem in a lot of books that I've read. The main character lacks motivation or goal, big or small. They're just meandering in existence as things are revealed. We've seen this in Seeker of Time, we saw this in Handbook for Mortals, we saw this in many other books before. If you review what Skylena is doing, she picked up this job to continue her sister's work of changing treatment inside the asylum to talk therapy as opposed to physical treatments. However, throughout the book, you just see Skylena talking to patients. You don't see any sense of urgency or attempt to change things with administration, even when she's supposedly on a deadline to get Dessin to release his original personality. It's mostly skipped over until the end of the month. There's just this casual chatting and then it's over. She's not really motivated, she's just there, and this lack of motivation or drive creates a character and story that meanders. A character goal doesn't have to be large, but to create a compelling story with movement, it helps if a character has something that they want and they work toward it, even in just a given situation. Like a momentary situation. It doesn't have to be a big goal. It doesn't have to be saving the world. This is where I keep seeing a lot of books struggle, and instead they either create fulfillment fantasies of just scenarios that fall into the lap for the need at the moment, or it's just a vibe/setting stories. Dessin legitimately could have pushed the envelope on what he should do in order to keep Skylena safe. He could have crossed some dubious lines and had to come back from them because Skylena wouldn't protect herself, and he didn't want to go through the helpless situation like he did with his mother again. I mean, that was the whole reason behind falling for her, but he never takes her out of Oryx's situation, and despite knowing what's going on in that house, he doesn't do anything to make sure that she doesn't get hurt. He continuously leaves her there, which fights against his motivation that we're told is that he wants to help her. He doesn't do anything to make sure that she doesn't get hurt, even if it means making her do something that she doesn't want to do, like leave that house. And so then this fights against the motivation we're told that he has, which is to protect her, to give him a second chance to protect women since he couldn't protect his mother. Tension happens when people have motivations that work against each other. You can recover from characters butting heads if you're supposed to be romantically involved. You also create great new tension by interrupting other people's motivations. If Oryx wanted Skylena and Dessin took her away, more conflict, more tension, as Oryx now must take action to get Skylena back if he wants her. But there's no follow-through in the desires and motivations that we're told people have. All of the people in this book just exist for the setting and for the moments. A couple of extra missed opportunities. Skylena could have pretended to be her sister after her sister's death. They're twins, after all. Then she either wouldn't have owed Oryx, or she would have owed him for something else if pretending to be her sister, and whatever relationship her sister had with him, and there could have been that pull of her pretending to be her sister and having her sister's relationship with Oryx, and this could have added even more tension in the people in the asylum as they noticed that she was not Scarlet. Then it also could have added some tension with Oryx if he was indeed engaged to Scarlet. That wasn't stated in the book, but he mentions that his fiance's name was Red, who was now dead. And I have a hard time believing that there's going to be a Red and a Scarlet, and that Oryx would have somehow demanded straight up sex without maybe seeing Skylena as a stand-in for Scarlet. Maston's entire character was a missed opportunity. He showed up halfway through the book for scenes, immediately made the MC uncomfortable, and then disappeared without even actually doing anything to Skylena. Not a missed opportunity, but I don't know where else to put it. So a random name, which turns out to be a dog, is owned by Dessin and shows up in chapter 56 through 59. There was no prep or introduction, and suddenly Skylena knows the name of this dog. I don't know, but it should have been introduced, or something, especially when it was the one that made the killing blow at the end of the book, saving Dessin, which was also a weak dramatic choice. Blood's not on my hands, even though it's your dog. Yeah, I don't think it works out that way, dude. It was still your responsibility. As I start to fade, let's get into some of the controversial parts of this book. Dessin and mental illness. Considering this book is a romance, I'm going to say that I don't have high expectations, and I didn't have high expectations for the presentation of mental illness in the story. It's not trying to be serious. It's trying to be a fantasy, and you can tell by some of the quotes that I've pulled from this and the savior complex of Skylena. That said, the presentation of specifically Dessin is one of the most TikTok things I've seen in a book. Also, Dessin's version of dissociative identity disorder reads more like putting spaces between himself and the truth as opposed to actually being that disorder. Like Ted Bundy would only talk about his crimes in the third person. Dessin wasn't anywhere near did in the way that he read. He read like someone He read like the same person throughout that just didn't want to acknowledge his feelings because it made him feel vulnerable. And so he pretended that there was somebody else there so that he didn't have to take responsibility. I don't know what sort of research was done for this character, but having watched more than my fair share of fake mental illness cringe compilations, the way Did was presented in here felt like the entire understanding of mental illness came from watching social media. Then you have Skylena, who has been hired at a hospital as a nurse for mental patients, and she just sits down and with Dessin, who informs and educates her on what his illness is, all the terminology, and she just believes him unquestioningly, like he wouldn't lie to her, like none of the people in this asylum would lie to her. Look, affirming care is not therapy. It's social work and advocacy. Skylena's not a healthcare worker. She's a victim advocate in the position she plays in this book, and this might be a spicy take. But more than that, Skylena's warned that this guy is manipulative, and yet she believes everything that he says immediately. She goes to him for education, and she shares her personal secrets with him when he asks. If she ever truly believed that he was dangerous or manipulative, she wouldn't have done that. But that's another common issue that I've seen in fiction without tension. Characters struggle to lie to each other because the author wants you to know some certain things about them. So instead of protecting themselves like they would in the real situation, ask and you shall receive all of the answers that you want. Not just that, but you've got like the head nurse who would have likely lied about flogging Dessin to hide what she's done if she thought it was that much of an issue. But I guess if it's normalized, then it doesn't matter. And then she wouldn't feel bad. It would just be like, what did you do? Well, I beat him. He was not behaving. That's just how it would go. Next thing, bad ways to develop a character. So back and forth Q&A and the 3 games of I'll tell you my secrets if you tell me yours with no stakes. It's just a trade so the reader can know things. This information doesn't affect their relationship or for the characters to say at any given time. There's one section in the book when Skylena and Dessin are literally just having a Q&A session back and forth, and it looks like this. Completely honest. I restate the terms. He tosses a raspberry in his mouth. How old are you, really? 22. He smirks, a little thrown off that this is my first question. Right-handed or left? Ambidextrous. I raise my eyebrows. Really? He is right-handed. I understand he to be the other mind in his head. Favorite instrument? Lethal or musical? Musical, I grimace. Harmonica, side smirk. Happy place? The forest. Dogs or cats? Dogs. Fire or ice? Fire. I could have guessed that one. Have you ever had a pet? Yes. What's your father's name? Wyatt. What's your fondest memory? Veto. I frown. I wonder why he wanted to veto that one. Have you ever been in love? Pet peeves. People who lack empathy. What do you like most about yourself? Nothing. He frowns. That's not true. No, it is. Some of this can work, but doing too much of it doesn't, and then just having characters interrogate each other in order to reveal information to the reader doesn't really work very well. At least that's what I thought. This is just a section for my random questions. Did Scarlet have a relationship with Dessin at all, or was Skylena starting fresh? How was the hospital so confident showing Dessin off to either city officials, a council, or whoever it was after he spent less than a day with Skylena, but his progress was so stark that they were excited to show him off, yet a couple of days later, or some days later, when he was working specifically with Skylena, there was no progress to pretty much anything of the same group of people. There are a couple of times when Skylena is following Dessin and thinks he's going to defile and murder me. She's been assaulted, her sister has been assaulted, and they both are jaded on men. She's experienced other people who were assaulted or have caused assault in this environment, and assault is common. How is it that Skylena is so assured that this could happen, but then still goes with Dessin anyway without any protection? I mean, we know the answer. She's never in any real danger, and so the words are just a lip service. But if we're talking about real development and story with stakes, you have to justify why someone would go into this situation where they believe that they will be assaulted. This doesn't do that. This literally just goes, I'm in danger, and then she keeps pushing the envelope, never actually being in danger. How does the dollification treatment fit into society run so much by religion that the state can't dictate to religious institutions? I think there was a missed opportunity here, not building that the dollification was more into something like a Madonna or referencing Madonna, and the whole point of being a doll was the purity or the similarity to Saint Mary if they really wanted to have a religion-fearing society. It still never made sense why Dessin could check himself into an asylum to hide from the government when they literally knew where he was the whole time and could come and collect him and execute him anytime that they wanted. Why did he just never run away? He literally could, and he knew that his hiding place wasn't safe. He also, just put up with the abuse on the daily because he was hiding from the government? That makes literally no sense, and he could have fought off literally all of the nurses and doctors, and he did, and he could have hid in the basement and just ran upstairs and stole snacks during the day, so it doesn't make any sense. Did Dessin check himself into the asylum, or did Kane check himself into the asylum, or did someone else check himself into the asylum? No one in the asylum mentions any other personality, but they should if they are aware that he has DID. We get nothing about any other personality in existence, so is it Dessin the whole time? Why was Ulrich taking off his shirt at a dinner table while telling Skylena about his dead fiancé? That was a choice. What was the point of the random creature created in this world that just sort of attacked Skylena in the forest, or the dog at the end of the book? Those both felt random and not part of the same world building. When things got serious, like we're gonna execute your guy in a couple of days, why did Dessin not run away from the asylum and take Skylena with him? He's worried for her living with Ulrich, but she only stayed with him to keep working at the asylum so that she could see Dessin. Dessin spends literally all day in isolation in an asylum room chained to a bed. How is he described as having glowing sun-kissed skin and bulging muscles, and how is nobody suspicious that after like a couple of years of being in the hole, that's what he looks like? Where did the ball come from? It felt arbitrary to put Skylena in a dress and force Ulrich and Dessin to meet to threaten. It could have been built into the plot, especially if Skylena wanted to schmooze some people to not execute Dessin, or give her more time. The ball should have had stakes and been mentioned before the chapter happened. Did Skylena fall for Kane or Dessin? How could she be in love with Kane when she spent the entire book with Dessin? Again, this just convinces me more that it's the same person but pretending his feelings aren't his for the vulnerability issue. Skylena then learns that Dessin was created to protect Kane because of massive trauma. When she meets the supersexual personality in the end, she learns that there are more, and she's not even like, oh shoot, what happened? Because all of this would be related to trauma. Scarlett's the one that made Skylena promise never to abandon her, but then killed herself the next day. I don't feel like that was developed well enough. The book ends with Dessin also releasing other patients from the asylum who were known for endangering others, and this is supposed to be a good thing, and she is the good guy. All of these people are bad situations, all of them. Why did Maston even exist? The same effect could have been accomplished by Dessin keeping Skylena out late, hoping that Ulrich would go to bed by the time Skylena went home, but he stayed up drinking instead, waiting for her. No character conflicts redressed. There's a time when Dessin tells Skylena she's never had friends, so how could she know what they look like? There's the ending when Sky screams at Dessin that she hates him. There are various moments of forced conflict in the book through dialogue that end with explosive emotion, and at the end of the scene never to be addressed in any way like I'm sorry or he was right or anything. It's a waste of character it's a waste of character building and makes everything seem pointless and overdramatic for no reason. Trigger warnings and problematic content. So I learned about this book through the drama that happened from a lack of trigger warnings. If you go to the description of it now, there is a long list of trigger warnings, but you look through many of the reviews and they'll say the listed warnings aren't enough, kind of like this one. The politics of trigger warnings aside, I have been told multiple times by trigger warning advocates they don't expect an author to know what all contents will be triggering, but at least they appreciate trying. Then you see discourse like this that says nothing's ever good enough, so why should anyone bother? No one has to like this book. I clearly didn't enjoy this book, but there's a difference between I didn't like this and I don't like these elements, I think this was poorly done, I think this is offensive, and saying your opinion is the moral one and someone needs to be punished, and if they feel distress from being mobbed on the internet, they're lying. Yes, there are liars, but also you're pretending that your mobbing and harassment and bullying of someone isn't that because you're justified or something. Whatever your perspective, people always justify themselves in their actions as to what they're doing to other people. Like or don't like, whatever you want, but can we get past this phase that personal preference and taste in bad writing is some kind of morality issue? What offends me the most with this stuff is when people get stuck on just saying problematic. They don't describe issues in the writing. They use buzzwords and sometimes they say get educated, but they don't describe the issue. One word that you'll consistently see in these one-star reviews of this book is transphobic. The extent of the transgender content in this book related to Niall's parents at that one point for like a page and a half, maybe, with like 5 references to the name. And that was it. I'm not saying you have to like that. I'm not saying you have to like how those characters interact with that, but those characters have their own perspective, and it's not your perspective. And other people's perspective may be offensive to you because they don't describe the world the same way that you do. They don't have the same morality that you do. And that's fine. We're in these books not to see ourselves and dictate how other people behave because we're trying to get them to behave like we would behave. That's not why I'm here. But I've read enough books where the reviews have some of the same non-specific complaints from people who said they didn't read the book to those saying that they did. The worst in all of this is that when you cling onto buzzword complaints that mean nothing, you actually erase discourse on where the real problems lie in a book. I talked about so much in this book review, but it's still chopped down from everything that there is to discuss, and I had another discussion on a live stream about this book. There are so many different things to discuss in this book, like the elements of storytelling, how they're used, the bad things that good people sometimes do, the good things that bad people sometimes do, the distaste in different perspectives and people, how different people can grow, because this is a series, so who knows what happens with Skylena, but welcome to humanity. Books and characters aren't perfect. Books and characters don't always reflect exactly what the author believes or thinks or how they act. They live within the bubble of their character. Even self-insert characters are insulated from the author. That's just how it is. And I wish we could get back to reading books and critiquing books and not jumping on people, 1, on the internet, and 2, mobbing people and then calling them fakers when they say they're upset because they're getting mobbed. We've seen this happen more than once, and that includes Meg Latour, and that includes I sexually identify as a helicopter or as an attack helicopter, as an Apache helicopter, whatever that was, who that author checked themselves into a mental institute and stopped and detransitioned because of the mobbery that came after them. And it's so obnoxious and it's such an overreaction, and it doesn't allow for the concept of exploring different ideas and different perspectives and being honest about the content. Because what? So final random section in this response, because I'm moving on. We're tired. Everybody is tired. We're here. I just wanted to say that I hate random sexual humiliation and mean girl politics. The whole, I slept with him and now let me use the word cock in a public setting and laugh at you for the sloppy seconds, and then Dessin comes in and does the same thing, mocking the nurse for finding him attractive. I just hate it. I hate it, but I know a lot of people like it, so, it's whatever. I'm not going to try to cancel this person because they partook in this specific trope that I absolutely cannot stand. With the environment that this is set up in, though, it just didn't need to happen. It felt out of place, and it made me think too much that the author was trying to be edgy and adult by using cock in the same way that many other books have used cock in inappropriate places, with no benefit to the story. So in closing, the bottom line here is that if you are building a coherent world, character, or story, the things that you choose should have a logical reasoning behind them. Maybe we don't get all of the information, but we should be able to watch how institutions, rituals, beliefs, and characters operate based on the elements of that world. If there's no connection in behavior or expression in the culture, then nothing makes sense. There's no tension, and it tells the reader literally nothing about what we're experiencing. But this story is, regardless of any of my critiques or any of the backlash that this book has received or any of the ratings, this book is still super popular and liked among its base readers. So the author knows how to market, and she knows who her market is. So that should tell you, if you know who your target audience is and successfully market to them, that's the difference between a book that sells and one that doesn't, not the quality of the writing. So pick up this book. If you look at the numbers on everything, you may like it, you may not like it. It is just a romp. I know another person that did not like this book, and I know another person that gave it 4 out of 5 stars because she had a great time with it. So maybe you'll like it if you want to just have a blast. And this author clearly loved the work that she was doing as she was working on that, and that specifically makes the book much more fun to read. So with that said, those are my thoughts on this book. I know so many of them. Also, yes, I'm looking forward to your comments down below. Please don't destroy me. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, weekend, and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out? The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross. Is he in trouble? We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him. Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Way. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?